Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be going over some implementation information for the Water Sector Program Round 2. We will have this presentation is available on our website. We also linked it in the chat here so that you could reach it. The recording, we are recording today, so that will also be posted on our YouTube channel. There's a link in the chat for that. Here it says questions should be entered in the Q&A, but we don't have a Q&A today, so just put them in the chat. Please enter your name and email address with your question in case we are unable to answer your question today, and we need to follow up with you after the webinar is over. Participants need to type their name and their system name in the chat box. This is how we're documenting attendance for the webinar so that we know who is here in attendance.
Tracy, I think that they're not able to for some reason. I'm going to work on that while you're talking.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So these are the items we're going to go over today. Where we are now, the revisions, if you need any, grant conditions, extensions in case you need to request an extension, the labor requirement that comes along with the funds, permission to bid process, request for payments, monitoring, and closeout. So where are we now? Our award letters have been issued for round 2, and also our authorization to incur costs and grant condition letters have been issued as well. Those letters were dated February 22nd. So that date is what we use as the basis for your deadlines to meet your grant conditions. We do have a section on our OCD LGA website for water sector information. So there's a link there in the presentation so that you can access it. For revisions, we ask that you look at your CEA or your grant agreement that we sent to you for signature. If you see any corrections that are needed, please email me and let me know, and we can get those corrections made to you and back out. Often between the time applications are submitted and awards are made and grant agreements are issued, CEOs or chief executive officers or your chief elected official may change. And so we want to make sure that we have those accurate. Let's see. So Heather said she sees that the chat is disabled and she's trying to correct it. So we'll let you know when we get that done. Okay, so grant conditions issued in your authorization to incur costs and grant agreement with conditions letter. So this is a list of all of the grant conditions that you have to meet in order for us to release funds and give you permission to bid. And we're going to go over each one of these individually. It is important that you do not advertise for bids or begin construction under any circumstances at this time. We will give you written authorization when we are ready for you to do so. We have to make sure that we meet all the grant conditions and that that the plans and specs are reviewed and the scope is confirmed to match the approved project. We will not release funds until all of the conditions are met. That means sometimes it just means something has to be submitted to us. Sometimes we have to approve it or clear it. So make sure that you get things in writing from us before you move forward. If revisions are required, we still need to complete all of those within the deadline. So please make sure that you are clearing your conditions as soon as possible. While you may have 2 months for some and 6 months for some, we do encourage you to clear those as early as possible. And it is also important to note that any extensions to deadlines to clear grant conditions must be approved by the Water Sector Commission. We're going to talk about that process in a little bit. Okay, so your grant agreement, that A document was attached to your grant condition letter that was issued on February 22nd. Review the information that is identified in your system and make sure that it's correct. The CEO, if that's a local government, it would be the mayor, it could be a board president, whichever, they should be identified correctly in the CEA. And then make sure that you return that hard copy to our office so that we can process that. You're required to complete an authorized signature form. These forms are used to identify who can sign requests for payment when these documents are submitted to our office for processing. This is due within 2 months. In order for you to complete all of this information, I would just point out that you have 4 spaces on this form. So you could identify 4 people that could sign requests for payment. And that's important because you may not always have access to, this certain person. So we encourage you to give yourself options in case you need to be able to get something signed quickly. You would type the name and you would sign the name. You have to sign it identical to how it is typed. For example, if you have a middle initial in your signature name, it also needs to show that middle initial in your typed name. And then whenever you submit requests for payments to us later in the process, it has to be signed exactly like you're signing it on this form. It's also important to note that the number 7, the field on number 7, that is the person that is going to certify the signatures of the 3 through 6 of who can sign the request for payments. That needs to be the chief executive officer of the system, if it's a local government or a system. And if you're not going to have it as the CEO, and the CEO would like to sign a request for payment, then you can identify another person to certify the signatures. You just must attach a resolution from the organization identifying the person that can certify those signatures. You'll send this form into us and then we will review it to make sure that it's correct. And then we will sign and approve in number 8. I see the chat's working now, so everybody should be able to enter their name, system name in the chat box, as well as any questions that you have as we go through. Heather Paul is also on the webinar, and she will probably answer questions as they are put in there as she can. And at the end, anything that we haven't been able to answer, we can go over. Okay. The next item is the electronic funds transfer enrollment form, also due within 2 months. We do encourage all grantees to sign up for EFT. It is not required, but it does move payments through quicker. If you are interested in receiving your payments via EFT, you can send an email, including your vendor number and your federal tax ID number, to the email there on the screen. When it comes to the documents that you have to complete to enroll for EFT, they ask that they not be sent to us, but they be sent directly to OSRAP, which is the office and the division that handles those documents. Okay, so your request for vendor information form, due within 2 months. You only are required to do this if you do not already have a vendor number. So some of you may not see this requirement in your list of grant conditions. And in those cases, that means you have already given us a vendor number to be used if you were funded. So you will complete the information here, and then it says on the form to return this form and the W-9 to Janelle Dickey. It gives you her email address right there, or you can fax it, either way. The W-9 form is also required, as I just said. If you don't have a vendor number, you would need to complete this form and include it with the vendor information form to Janelle Dickey, who is one of our staff persons in our office. The supplemental information form is due within 2 months of your authorization or grant condition letter date. On this form, you're going to be giving us the grantee's name, which would be your system name, which should also be the name that's entered in on your letter and in your CEA. A mailing address as well as a physical address, and your unique entity identification number or your UEI number. All entities that are receiving federal funds are required to have a UEI number and that it be registered and active in SAM.gov. If you don't already have this, I would suggest that you start that process right now. It does take some time, so it's better to start it as early as possible. We ask that you put the name, phone number, and email address of the contact person that is going to be managing this grant for the system. We're asking for a contact at the system here. The name of the system operator and the operator certification ID number. All systems by the end of the program or the end of your project is going to be required to have a certified operator. That number is issued when they have completed that certification process. If you don't have a certified operator at this time, you can put that there, but just know that that will be a condition of the closeout, is that your operator does get certified. And we have a space there for you to put that how and when your operator would earn their certification if they are not certified at this time. Under project information, we ask if the acquisition of real property is required to complete your project. This could mean you were purchasing a piece of property to place a well. It could also be servitudes or easements if you are extending a system. So it's important that you note that you have to follow the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970, which is often referred to as the Uniform Act. It is required whether you are using federal funds to pay for the actual acquisition or not. If it is involving a project that involves federal funds, then the Uniform Act must be followed. If you have any questions about that, we do have staff persons that can help you with that. And I do have a slide at the end of the presentation that provides you their contact information. Okay, so the next item is your financial management questionnaire, which is due within 2 months. This is a document that has to be reviewed and approved in our office. So I encourage you to get it here as soon as possible. You would put your name and your number of employees, and then you would identify who does what process for your entity. One of the things that we look at here, this is our audit requirement and looking at internal controls. Also, as the grant progresses and these types of things occur, for instance, approving payment of invoices or requests for payment or signing requests for payment, we're going to go back and refer to this document to make sure that we have accurate information. So fill out who is actually going to be doing these things. For example, under C, approves payment of invoices. Often, if it's a local government, the mayor will approve it. Sometimes there may be a director of finance. And we're going to look when we get that request for payment and look at those invoices and note whether or not somebody approved that actual invoice for payment. And that's where we're going to come back to this form and look who you identified. So it is important that you put who is actually going to be completing these functions. We are going to look at a copy of your bond or your insurance policy. We do require that you send us that. And we are going to look to make sure that it is up to date. If you have an old bond that has been in place, we're going to ask for documentation that it has been paid and it is current. The Title VI assurances is a document that was prepared by the U.S. Department of Treasury, which is where these funds are coming from. It is due to us within 2 months. There's a couple of items that I'm going to mention specifically to you just for your information, but this shows you all of the items that are included in the assurance. And the CEO is going to sign and date the assurance form and put the name of the entity here for recipient. So the things I really wanted to point out to you about this document is there is a link in the document on number 3, providing information on providing meaningful access for limited English proficiency persons. So you need to go back and look at that information to determine if you need to take steps to make this information available to those persons. You need to remember to include the language from number 5 on any of your agreements or contracts that you issue for this project. And remember to maintain a complaint log, and it is required in number 8. Documentation of this complaint log will be required at the end of your closeout. The performance schedule. This document's due to us within 2 months. We do use it to monitor the progress of the project. The quarters that are on the form indicate the performance schedule and how you're moving through your expenditures. It does coincide with the 4 quarters of the state's fiscal year. So when you send this document to us, we are going to look at all of your amounts that you put here, and we're going to make sure that it is equal to the amounts that you were awarded, as well as any match funds that you have indicated. When you complete the form, make sure that you identify each activity as it corresponds to the line item budget in your agreement. For example, if you have a sewer project, then you could have acquisition, construction, or engineering. If you only have construction or sewer construction, then you would just have one activity there, but you may have different benchmarks that you're going to include that you want to document as your process. Be mindful of your grant process when you're drafting your timeline, that you're including all the steps that have to take place. And for each activity, you're going to be estimating your projected expenditures by dollar amount and for each quarter. Again, when you submit a request for payment form to us, we are going to go back to this form and look at where you had indicated you would be in regarding expenditures, so that we can make sure your project is moving in a timely manner. If you do need additional sheets, you can attach that on this to the form. And also make sure that you distinguish between funds by source and amount. So this is what the form looks like. Your authorization to incur cost date would go here. For all of you, that date is February 22nd of 23. Therefore, your initial entries would be here under this January to March Q3. That would be the first time, because that's when your authorization to incur costs should occur. And then you would calculate out from there. Plans and specifications are due within 6 months. A copy of your final plans and specifications plus your final cost estimate has to be submitted to LDH for water projects and DEQ for wastewater projects within 6 months of the date of your letter. We also need to be notified in writing that all documents have been submitted to LDH or DEQ within this time period. With that notification, you need to submit to us a copy of the final cost estimate. We do not need a copy of the plans and specifications. We only need to be notified that you have submitted those to the cognizant agency and get a copy of that final cost estimate. Our office will then follow up with LDH and DEQ to ensure that all projects approved in the application have been included in the final plans and specifications. we have to make sure that the scope of your projects that were approved or is what is being included in the plans and specifications. The program does require that every grantee have a rate study completed. This has been a long process and seems to be very close to getting this done now. We are working to hire firms to work with our grantees on the completion of the rate studies and any actions that are needed. We will assign a firm to work with each grantee, and the firm will contact the grantee to begin the process. All grantees will be required to participate. If a grantee has completed a rate study on or after July 1 of 21, this document can be reviewed to ensure that it meets the water sector program requirements, and it could be acceptable if it does. Grantees that meet all other grant conditions will have the option of providing a certification regarding the rate study requirement. In order to move forward, we will provide more information on this during the implementation process. We did come up with this certification process so that if a grantee has met all of the other conditions, we wanted them to be able to go ahead and move forward with the project and the process and getting construction bid done and not have to wait on the rate study. It's just important that all grantees understand that the rate study is a requirement and taking actions if it is needed. For example, if it determines that you need to raise your rates, that action is required, or water sector program funds would have to be repaid. An acquisition timeline due within 2 months. If the completed supplemental information form indicates that real property will be acquired, it's important to note that this is through purchase or donation. It doesn't matter if you will be paying for it or if someone is donating it to you, there's still a process that has to be followed. The acquisition timeline needs to include dates and specific actions that will be taken to complete the acquisition process that is identified in the approved application. And make sure when you are doing your acquisition timeline that you take that into consideration for your performance schedule as well. If your acquisition, if you think it's going to be a lengthy process, make sure you're taking that into account for your performance schedule. Sometimes it may cause you a delay in getting your plans and specs completed or being able to go to bid. So it's important that you take those things into consideration. Okay, your contractor clearance form. This is a verification of professional services eligibility. It is due within 2 months. If you intend to use water sector program funds for professional services, meaning legal assistance, administrative assistance, or engineering, then you're required to complete this form and submit it to our office. We will review it and then we will provide you a response with the bottom part of the form completed. Your matching funds documentation is due within 2 months. The documentation identifying the matching funds as available to be spent has to be submitted to our office within 2 months. The specific documentation will depend on the type of matching funds that you have. For example, if this is a local government and you have general funds that you have contributed or are using as your match funds, then you could provide us a letter from the mayor or the parish president saying that the funds are available in your account. If it is a loan that you have gotten or are working to get as your match funds, then you would have to have documentation from the lender saying that the funds are available to be spent and they're ready to go. Having an application that's in process or them saying that they may give you money or they would consider giving you money is not sufficient. So if you have any questions about whether or not your documentation meets the level of what we require, please contact me and we can talk about it. If your project involves consolidation, then we ask that your consolidation documents be submitted within 2 months. The executed agreement between the systems that memorializes the consolidation is what we're looking for here. We don't just want a resolution or a letter saying we're all going to agree. We need that legal document signed by all parties involved. So if, when you're going through this process to clear your grant conditions, if you determine that you need an extension on any of those deadlines, all extensions have to be approved by the Water Sector Commission. The grantee has to submit a letter to me requesting the extension and include an explanation of the need for the extension and the length of the extension. It is important for you to note that you may, as a grantee, be required to appear before the Water Sector Commission to discuss the request. They could request that, so you make sure that you're prepared for that. Whenever there typically is a water sector meeting once a month. We don't get notification except for a week prior, so it could be something that you have to respond to quickly. For labor requirements, it's important for you all to review the U.S. Treasury's compliance and reporting guidance document. It is regarding labor requirements for infrastructure projects. You can find it at the link that I have here. There are requirements that have to be met for projects whose total exceed $10 million. And you need to make sure that you include the appropriate requirements in any of your communications with your contractors or subcontractors, so they are aware of their requirement. Davis-Bacon, many of you are familiar with Davis-Bacon requirements after working with other federal programs. Davis-Bacon is not specifically required with this project or with this program, but Treasury did place some requirements regarding prevailing wages in the guidance. Permission to bid will be given to grantees when all grant conditions have been cleared and or approved by our office. We also will make sure that LDH and DEQ has notified our office that the plans and specifications do adhere to the scope of the approved application. As I mentioned before, grantees that have cleared all grant conditions except for the rate study may be issued permission to bid, with the contingency that the grantee may be required to repay all grant funds if actions taken regarding rates are not completed. Grantees will be required to advertise for bid within 30 days of being given permission to bid. I would add that just remember that any extension requests to deadlines have to go through the Water Sector Commission. So when you come to ask for an extension to one of our deadlines, you need to have submit a letter to us with the explanation of why you need the extension and the length of the extension. The request for payment, you need to make sure that the signature of persons signing the request for payment form are the same persons that you identified on the authorized signature card. You have to sign in blue ink and do not use any correction fluid or tape on the form. If your project involves funds from the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund or the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, then we must receive documentation from LDH or DEQ indicating that those program personnel have reviewed the request for payment. That documentation needs to be submitted to us. Payments will not be approved until this documentation is received. This is a copy of what that form looks like. You would put in the top your name, address, telephone number of your grantee. You can see where some fields are yellow. Those are the fields that you as the entity would be completing. Your subrecipient number is your number that's been identified on your CEA. You enter your federal tax ID number, and your UEI number. Remember that you must have an actively registered UEI number in SAM.gov. And we do go in to verify. If we cannot verify in SAM.gov that it's active, then we cannot process these payments. You would enter your request number in F. Your actual delivery date is the most recent date of delivery of services for each state fiscal year. The state fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30th. If you're requesting funds for work that extended over that time period, so if you're requesting for work that began, let's say in May and went until July or August, then you're going to need to be able to split that cost into two. You would have to invoice under ADD FY1. You would put the costs up to June 30th. And in ADD FY2, you would put the costs after June 30th. So it would be July 1 forward. Under status of matching funds, you're going to enter your amount of your matching funds that were committed to the project. And then the amount of matching funds that have been expended and documentation that have been previously submitted to us for confirmation. So on your first request for payment, if you have not submitted us anything as of yet, showing that you had expenditures, then that would be 0. On number 3, under H, the amount of matching funds remaining to be expended and documented would be the difference between 1 and 2. The amount of funds expended since previous submission, and then it says attached documentation. This is where if you are using documentation that you have expended matching funds, you would give us the copy of the invoice. You would also give us documentation of the expenditure. That means that we have to have proof that the payment has been made in the form of a canceled check, a check number, and a bank statement showing that that canceled check has been paid, a credit card receipt, something that shows that this invoice was actually paid. We have to have that in order to document that it has been expended. And then finally, the remaining funds that are to be spent, the 2 calculation fields, this is an Excel spreadsheet, will calculate based on what you enter. You put your grant amount under status of water sector funds, your water sector funds received to date, you would enter that as well, and then the formal subtotal. And then down under ADD 1 and ADD 2 is where you will put your costs that you are requesting for. If all of your funds are in the same state fiscal year, if all of the work was completed within the same state fiscal year, then you would only have an entry in ADD 1. And you would only have an entry at the top under G for ADD FY1. And again, you would enter these numbers here and it will calculate under amount. If you have a sewer project, you list it under sewer. If you have a water project, you would list it under water. If you are documenting, are you requesting funds for water sector, for engineering fees, you would put them there, or administrative fees, you would put it here. It's important to note that if you have those line items in your CEA, then that means you have funds set aside for those activities. If you only have sewer or water, or you only have construction and contingencies available, then that means you do not have water sector funds available for professional services. So you would not be requesting funds for those costs here. If you are requesting funds for acquisition, you would put them there. Any costs associated with acquisition would be drawn here under the acquisition line item. Under K is where you will be signing the request for payment. Again, it can only be persons that were on the approved authorized signature card that will be signing the form. Make sure that you sign in blue ink with no correction fluid or tape. and that you sign the form exactly as the name is on the authorized signature card. On the bottom, oh, sorry about that. On the bottom of the form here is where the state will put how much money we are going to approve with water sector and how much would be paid for with matching funds. We will review, sign, and approve, and we will send a copy of this form back so that the system is aware of how much water sector funds will be paid and how much matching funds will need to be paid for this cost. For monitoring, we will be monitoring the progress of the grant through that performance schedule that you're submitting with your grant conditions. So it's important, again, to make sure that you're accurate in your projection. If when we receive a request for payment and we go back and look at your performance schedule and you're more than 1 quarter behind, we will ask for an explanation and a revised schedule. If it becomes a problem, we will have to go to the Water Sector Commission for their comment, because please note that there is a strict expenditure deadline for these funds. The labor certification reviews may be required of payroll documents to ensure proper wages are paid if we determine that we need to do that. We also can request documentation of a language access plan regarding limited English proficiency persons if we determine that we need to do so. On-site inspections will be conducted when 50% of the grant funds have been for construction have been expended and construction is substantially complete, but retainage has not been paid. There will actually be on-site visits. So it's important just to know that those will be coming as we get to these 2 benchmarks in the process. For closeout, there will be a report provided to all the grantees prior to project completion that must be completed and correct. It must be submitted to us correctly for final construction payment to be approved. We will review the documentation when it is submitted and we will request for any revisions as necessary. Remember that grantees are going to be required to have a certified operator on staff operating the system prior to closing out the grant with the state. I would just like to remind everyone that this is a new program and guidance continues to be issued from U.S. Treasury, which is our funding source. If additional program requirements are needed, we will notify grantees as we become aware. This is some project contact information for the water sector program. I'm Tracy Watts, I'm the director. Heather Paul is our assistant director. And then we have 2 staff persons that are also working with the water sector program, Christy Crone and Glenn Scott. You can reach them at the information there as well. And if you have any questions regarding acquisition requirements, you can contact Christy Galley, our program manager. For procurement requirements, you can also reach out to Christy Galley or Denise McGee, who are staff persons in our office that are specialists in those areas. Okay, we've reached the end of the presentation. So I'm going to now kind of turn this over to Heather to see if we have any questions that we need to address.
During the webinar, we didn't really get many, but one question that we did get that's very popular is about if I had a recent rate study done, can that count?
As it said in the presentation, if the rate study was completed on or after July 1 of 2021, you can submit that documentation to the firm that will be working with you so that they can review it and make sure that it meets the program requirements. If it does, they will accept it. If it does not, they will notify you and let you know why, and then work with you in order to get to where you need to be.
The next one we have, if we are already signed up for EFT through the state, do we need to do a new application? Or since we're already in, are they good to go?
If you are using a vendor number that is already established as EFT, then you should be set up already. You shouldn't have to redo that.
Can you discuss labor certification reviews? Would these only be required if the project is over $10 million?
No, I can't tell you that that would be the only time it would be required. We haven't been notified of a requirement yet, or we've not been informed of how much we have to monitor based on their labor requirements. I would encourage you to go review that compliance and reporting guidance from US Treasury to make sure that you meet all of the requirements. And just maintain your documentation in case we have to ask for it.
Do you require a hard copy be mailed to you of the consolidation agreements, or will a PDF suffice?
A PDF will suffice.
I think that's rights of way. Do rights of way fall under the uniform code?
They do. They're called rights of way or servitudes. They do. So you need to make sure that you follow that process. Again, if you have questions about that, you can contact Christy Galley in our office.
The best method to get signed documents back to your office?
So if it's something that we require as a hard copy, you need to mail it to our office. Our mailing address is P.O. Box 94095. And Heather can put this in the chat so that you all can have it. It's Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70804. If you want to deliver it, if there are documents you want to deliver to our office, you can deliver it to our physical address, which is 1201 North 3rd Street, Suite 3-150. And that is Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70802. If it is documents that can be emailed, then you can email them to us. If you at any of the grant representatives or me or Heather, you can email them to us and we can make sure they get to the appropriate person. As I said, we do have staff, very limited staff actually working with this. So we will try to process and handle all the documents as quickly as we can. It's incumbent upon the grantees to make sure that they're meeting their deadlines.
Tracy, somebody asked, we recently submitted the majority of these items as a recipient of the Love Louisiana Outdoors Grant. Can we resend the same EFT and FMQ, or must we complete new ones?
So this is not a CDBG funded project, so we do not mix those monies. The forms are different, the funding source is different, the requirements are different. So please, if you have a CDBG grant, please don't assume that these requirements are the same or the documents are the same, or documents from one grant program could be used for another. That's not the case. You need to make sure that you're submitting all of the documents that we have requested in the grant condition letter.
If we intended to bid the project in phases and have a project ready to bid, can we obtain approval to bid by phase?
We can approve permission to bid based on your projects that you've completed, plans and specs. However, you still have to have cleared all your other grant conditions. So for example, all of your grant conditions that you have to meet, that all your documentation due within 2 months. you get all of that done, you get your plans and specs for, let's say, your first phase into DEQ and LDA or LDH to review. And then everything's ready to go except for the rate study. We can let you fill out the certification and approve for you to go ahead and bid that first project. It's important to note that if you're going to phase your project and do your plans and specs in phases or in different sets, if you intend on going past that 6-month deadline, you must go to the Water Sector Commission and request an extension.
We applied for and received a single water sector grant to cover 2 separate water projects. Do both projects need to be ready to bid within 6 months?
All plans and specs are required to be completed within 6 months of your grant condition letter. If you're not able to meet that deadline, you're going to have to provide a letter explaining the need for the extension and how long of an extension you need. There have been extensions approved by the Water Sector Commission under round 1. There are situations where you may need to complete one project before you can complete the second project. The commission will review that information and make a determination. It's just important for you to remember that these funds all have to be obligated by 24 and expended by 26. The commission does not want to wait until 26 because at that point in time, if project fails, if it doesn't spend the money, then the state doesn't have the time in order to reallocate those funds and get them spent on one of our much needed projects. So if you're going to want to extend past that 6-month deadline, you're going to have to provide a reason to the commission and they're going to have to approve it.
We're caught up on questions right now, but just to remind people who came in late, make sure to put your name and your system name in the chat so that we know that you were here.
So I'll just go back on the presentation here. Again, this is contact information for persons that work with the office, with the water sector program. Some of you may work with our office on other programs. Not everyone in our office works with the water sector program, so it's important that you make sure you contact persons that are familiar with the program and that can answer those questions for you. A couple of notes that I would say based on our experience with round 1. Is to remind you that we do not need copies of the plans and specs. We only need to be notified when you send them to LDH or DEQ and a copy of that final cost estimate. It's also important to remember that you have many conditions due within 2 months of your grant condition letter, which is dated February 22nd of 23. So because April 22nd falls on a Saturday, we would go until April 24th of 23 for you to meet those conditions that have to be completed within 2 months. And for your 6-month, let's see, that would be August 22nd would be your 6-month deadline for your rate study or your plans and specs to be completed. When it comes to the rate study, if it is our issue, if we could not get a firm assigned to you in a timely manner in order to get that completed within the 6 months, we will not penalize you for that. We will allow you to be able to move forward again with that certification if you have all of your other conditions met.
Tracy, one more question. Are the communities required to open a separate grant checking account for operation of the project?
No, we do not require that you open a separate checking account.
Do we need to send in our entire insurance policy, or is there a more specific section of the policy needed?
You need to look at the instructions on that form. You can also reach out to Janelle Dickey in our office if you have a question about the specific type. I believe they look at your bond for your, maybe your criminal bond or whatever goes along with all of those financial functions for your entity. And bonds are required. So we did encounter in round one, sometimes these systems don't have that in place, but it is a requirement that you get it in place. Again, if you have questions about the type of bonding or what's required, Heather put Janelle Dickey's email address in the chat. You can contact Janelle Dickey in our office and ask those questions. The other thing I'd like to point out is the grant condition letters were issued to the grantees. And in that letter, it requires that someone from the system attend this meeting. Engineers, consultants do not satisfy that requirement because inevitably our agreement is with the grantee. They have to be responsible. If funds have to be repaid, it will be the grantee. That's why we require that. We want them to understand their responsibilities. Again, this presentation is being recorded and will be made available on the YouTube channel for our office. So I would highly encourage anyone who was unable to watch today, but perhaps their engineer is available today to watch it, that you have them watch it. We may require a certification from grantees that are not showing up as being in attendance on the chat today. So I would have them go back and watch this presentation. I think we've covered everything. Again, I would just remind you all that it is a new program. We are putting processes in place as we go through things. So we appreciate your patience and your responsiveness whenever we request information. If you have any questions that come to you after today, please email them or you can give us a call and we'll be happy to work through the process with you. So if there's no further questions, we're going to go ahead and end the presentation. We thank you for joining us today and you have a good afternoon.